Welcome to MSL Talk with Tom Caravella, a podcast specifically designed for MSLs and all things field medical. Hey guys, welcome to the podcast. My guest today is Julie Chen, Senior MSL with Janssen Pharmaceuticals. And we talk about Julie's experience as a new MSL and what's been working for her so far, how things are going, what challenges she's been facing. Great conversation. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn, of course, and YouTube. Hope you guys enjoy this. Hey, Julie, how you doing today? Welcome back.
Hey, good morning, Tom. How are you? Thank you so much for inviting me back. I'm just so grateful and honored to be here.
I couldn't wait. You were literally one of my most popular guests that had that story about, breaking into the MSL role. And I had so much outreach after your episode that I could not wait to have you back. But now things have changed. So why don't we do a little introduction? Maybe you catch us up to speed a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm super excited to be here again. And so the last time I was here was about 6 months ago, and I landed my first job with Syneos in partnership with Janssen. And so a few months in, a position at Janssen opened for Senior MSL role for cardiovascular, and that's in my territory. So the Janssen field director talked with my Syneos field director, goes out and open, and of course you want that open communication with the parent company. So I applied, and here I am. Coincidentally, or kind of coming full circle, the last time I was here, I was in my third week of training, and I'm going through my new training again, and I'm in my third week of my Janssen training. Yeah, literally, like I think it's almost to the day. It's like whatever we planned Thursday last time too, and it was almost to the day. It's really funny.
That's crazy. I love stuff like that. It's meant to be. It's going to be a really good conversation.
It's meant to be.
Yeah. Well, congratulations. I'm totally
Thank
not
you.
surprised. Excited for you though. That's great news. So before we jump into, so we had this topic of, so you break into your MSL role. We talked about that last time. And then now you have a new position. And so you're an MSL. So now what? Let's talk about, what it's like to be a new MSL, what's working, what challenges you're having. But before we get into that, we have an announcement, right? Exciting announcement.
We do. So Tom and I are going to launch something new and a little bit different. We're going to launch MSL Talk live. It's going to be on Clubhouse. It's going to be a very similar format to this podcast, but live discussion with panel guests, and hopefully we'll have time to take some questions from the audience. I think it's something the listeners are going to really, really love. So if you're not on Clubhouse, get on it. It's one of the new social media apps. It's a live stream only, so there's not going to be a recording later, so you have to join live. If you need an invite, phone a friend. I think it might still be invite only. I'm not 100% sure, but if you're able to get on, join us. If you can't get an invite for some reason, message Tom Ryan on LinkedIn, and we'll get you an invite as long as we keep getting them. And once you're there, follow Tom and myself, and we'll invite you to join the event. We're going to post more links for the event as well, and just logistics. It's going to be first Tuesdays of every month. We're going to start on June 1st. That's coming up soon. And it's going to be 1:30 Eastern Standard Time or 10:30 Pacific Standard Time. And we're looking at like maybe 20, 30 minutes of talk and hopefully 10 more minutes for a couple questions. So I think that kind of summarizes it. Is there anything you wanted to add, Tom?
I am super excited. Julie came up with this idea. It's funny. I've been thinking about doing kind of a lot. There's so many platforms now. And I was thinking about doing kind of a live version of the MSL Talk podcast and kind of make it more interactive. And Julie brought this up to my attention, and I was like, this is perfect. I've actually used Clubhouse before. It's a great platform. It's just easy. You download the app. I think you do need to be invited, but it's becoming really, really popular. So once you get that invite and you're on, I think you just go in and search for the events. So if you put MSL Talk Live, you'll see the latest event. Now, keep in mind that it's a week from now. So today's Tuesday, and it's going to be next Tuesday, the first Tuesday of every month at 1:30 Eastern Time. We're going to wait till the end of this episode to announce our first topic because we kind of feel like that'd be fun. So you have to stick around.
Yeah,
and you have to join us. You have to
you
check
do.
it out next week. It's going to be a lot of fun. So Julie, thank you. Thank you for your partnership on this and for coming up with this idea. So let's get to business. How are you doing? What is it like to be an MSL and how is it going?
It's going well. It's funny. I think we came to this topic because I thought we were talking, and I said, you get to this point where you become an MSL, and there's this moment of like, oh my goodness, what do I do
Now
now?
what?
So now what? Now what? And you go through so much. You go through the training and everything, and it's and you have a moment where you're like, oh, okay, I'm in. Okay, I got to go. What do I do now? And so I think that's how we kind of came across this topic.
Yeah. And
But it's been going really well so far.
listen, I'm sure it is because you crush life and you're great at everything you do. So of course it's going well for you. So,
Thanks.
but what
You're
was
being too
training?
nice.
I'm
Thank you,
curious.
Tom.
Like people talk about training and some people have a real hard time with
Yeah.
it and find it
Yeah.
challenging and other people really just, they
Yeah.
love it. How is it for you?
Yeah.
What did you think of it and what went well and what didn't?
Yeah. Yeah. Training for me it was a little intense. And I think it's funny. I think because I was going into my therapeutic area of cardiology and with my cardio background, I figured not that this should be easy, but this can't be that hard, right? But the sheer amount of information and detail you need to know and understand at that really deep level is it's humbling. It's humbling.
Yeah.
And I think it was similar for several of my teammates. We all came from strong cardio backgrounds. But I don't think I realized how hard it was going to be to be an MSL. You need to be able to speak the medical language. You got to understand the jargon because you really want to be able to go toe to toe with your specialists, right? And so you got to know disease states and lab and diagnostics. But on top of it, you got to know procedures, surgeries, human anatomy, and be able to navigate that discussion artfully and eloquently. And then you have to know the molecule and the product you're with, the pharmacology, the studies in deep detail, and the statistics. And at the same time, trying to take a step back and say, okay, what's the take-home message? What stands out? How am I going to achieve that 2-minute elevator pitch for each major article? And it's a lot. So I think it was a little intense.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say is take it seriously because it's no joke.
Take it seriously.
Right.
Take it very seriously.
But how do you prepare? What's your advice for people that are heading into training or have some type of training within their MSL role? Is there some kind of preparation you can do?
I think, it's funny. It's just, don't hang out in your pajamas. Number one, I don't think you can. But really, I think you have to have your game face on. Like I am starting to go through training again right now, and I'm getting ready for this like mental marathon. And I think it's similar to a lot of the stuff that you and Maria talked about on your 10 tips for MSL field sanity. I think that applies to like MSL just in general. I think you have to have that mentality. And so just trying to right now, I'm trying to get a regular schedule of like, when do I need to study? When do I need to get up and move? When am I going to go walk and work out? And trying to take it one day at a time to kind of pace yourself. Because I do think it's a mental marathon. And there comes a moment where you start to reach like saturation of your memory and your mental clarity. And if you're not in the right mindset, you don't have the time set aside for training and being really focused, it's going to start to get muddled, the details. So I think trying to get as much mental clarity going in, keeping it through, making it a priority is really important.
Yeah.
And not hang out in your PJs all day long.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. And if you haven't listened to that episode, it's a little different because it talks more about the personal side of, how you go about your day as opposed to really specific MSL stuff. It really could apply to anyone.
Yeah.
So it's the episode with Maria Urso and it's the top 10 tips for MSL sanity. And it was really good. So I appreciate the fact that you listened to it and that it actually helped you. So, but other than that, so you get through, so you're successful getting through the training portion. And then what happens next? Do you you jump right into KOL engagement and what happens next?
So I think, so you go into your training and you got to prep for certification. And so certifications at the end of your training just to make sure that you're comfortable talking about all your resources. And they kind of want to see your presentation skills again. And so I think one thing is when you're prepping for your certifications, the more practice you can have, the better. Really, really reviewing your resources in the article. But I think this is like common for anything. For interviews, practice saying out loud. You really have to practice saying out loud. I think a lot of people practice for interviews or presentations like in their head. They'll read stuff and do it mentally. But when you say it out loud, you're going to hear how it sounds. Does that flow together? Do I need to put a pause for emphasis here? And I think practicing out loud is going to be really important for prepping. And trying to be engaging and telling a story with your data. I think that's the hard part. That's the part of MSLing. That's the art of MSLing, right?
Yeah.
And so just trying to do all that during your certification to convey everything you've learned, but in a way that is really still engaging, because data can start to get dry. And if you let it be dry, it can get dry.
Yeah.
So the more you practice, the better. Practicing with your teammates is super duper important. I think if you're going to have a terrible run, and you are like the first time you say it out loud, right? Have that terrible run with your friends, with your teammates.
Yeah.
Versus on your certification, versus with a provider. But once you pass your certification, then you're like, okay, now I have to engage with KOLs, right? I have to start meeting with providers. And this is where it gets a little funny for me. You're pushing so hard, you're hustling, right? You're trying to get your first role, you're applying, you're interviewing, you're networking, you get in. Okay, you're like, great, I'm in. You're training nonstop. You pass certification, and you're like, I'm an MSL.
Yeah.
What do I do? And I think there is this like a little bit of a mental moment where you just have to jump in.
Mm-hmm.
Tom, have you ever done something where you like really want to do, but it was also like scary or new?
Totally.
Yeah.
This podcast was an idea I had a while back, and I just had to jump into it and just do it. And I wasn't perfect when you get to a point like sometimes it's analysis paralysis kind of thing where you want it to be perfect, and you plan. And sometimes you just have to say, this is something that I'm in, and I'm committed, and I'm here, and I got here, whether it's, like this podcast, whether it's your job. I mean, it was an effort, and it's an effort for a lot of people to land that position. And once you're there, it's like, okay, game face, let's go. What do I have to do every day to be successful in this job, in this role? So I'm right there with you. You just got to go.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think so. At the end of your training, you're starting to meet with internal partners. You're doing a lot of your KOL mapping, and you're planning. And at some point, it's not going to be perfect. You just have to go. And like, to me, I think is maybe like learning how to snowboard. You got all your gear on, you got your helmet on, and you're at the top of the slope. And there's this moment of like, what am I doing? I'm going to throw myself down a slope.
Yeah.
But you have to do it. And, and you're going to get up. It's going to be great. And you're going to fall a bunch. And you have to keep getting up and keep doing it. And you're going to have to kind of figure out and enjoy the process and learn from it all and kind of roll with it. And I think because if you don't, like, it's going to be disheartening, because you can send out like so many emails and get maybe 2 responses. And so if you can't learn from that and move forward and say, okay, well, I can't let that deter me. I got to keep going, try different tactics, different approaches, and just kind of, keep going with it. Just try something new, try something different, and not be scared of it. But there's that moment of it's like paralysis. You're like, no, it's go time. It's go time. I got to do this.
And I like what you said before, to get back. So you obviously were going through training with other folks that were starting at the same time. So you actually had a built-in kind of, network, if you will, of folks that were going through the same thing. So did you do role play? Like, how often did you communicate? Were you guys role playing together and sharing like best practices and successes?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was really lucky. I had a group of all of us, because they hired a new team. So we had a team of us that were all brand new. But even right now in my current training, there's a handful of us. There's about 5 of us that are training together as well. And I think, it's really lucky when you have a group of people to practice with, because if you don't, you're sort of like in an island. But yes, we practice together for our certification. We set times to do practice runs with each other. And it's twofold. It's for you to practice with in a safe space.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can also glean different tactics, perspectives. Oh, you said this in a really great way. I loved how you said that. I'm going to borrow that. Or like, why did you point that out? Like, you point out that specific data point. Why was that important to you? Because maybe I'm missing it, right? And then even after we passed certification, I was so lucky. I had both on the Syneos and Janssen team, there are fantastic people. I had really great people that I got to work with and still get to work with now. And you create these relationships virtually. It's funny, you create these relationships virtually with people you've never met, but it's amazing. And so I have friends up north in New Mexico, Arizona, Seattle, New York now, and I love it. But we talk even now, like, hey, I just met with a provider. They asked me these really tough questions. What would you say? And, this is what I said. What do you think? And we kind of go back and forth. And I think that really helps, that prepping, that brainstorming.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a really big fan of 2 heads are better than 1.
Yeah.
And 4 heads are better than 1.
Yeah.
And so sharing what doesn't work, what works. Sometimes if you had a tough week, because it goes in waves. You're going to have weeks where you're killing it, and you're going to have weeks where it's really quiet. You're pushing, but nothing materializes.
Yeah.
And so you call up the bud and say, hey, like I got a dry week, or I don't have a lot of things set up next week. What's working for you? What did you do differently? I think sharing those best practices is really, really important. Calling your teammates and just getting advice, and everybody has something to offer. So even if you're hearing some of the same discussion, they may offer a different perspective or give a different word of encouragement, and that might get you over your hump.
So what about, there's probably a lot of people listening to this that don't work for large companies. They work for small companies, and they might not be starting out or be in a situation where they have a buddy that's going through the same thing. They might there might be people at different levels or whatever. Is it important for these folks to reach out and find mentors and raise their hand, ask for help? What's your advice on that piece of it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think there's a lot of times it's more common that you're going to start with a small company, or there's only going to be you just starting out because you're the only one who's in your territory. And so I think reaching out to your teammates, connecting with whoever you can on your team, and then reaching out to, other peers, other MSLs in your territory. So I've connected with just cardiovascular MSLs in my area from other pharma companies, and just trying to get advice. What's your approach? What tidbits can you get from other people? I think when you connect with somebody, it's easy for that relationship to keep moving forward, and then to suddenly get mentors. I feel like I've been lucky. I've been able to pick up a couple of new mentors along the way, and it's just people who you click with, and they have good advice for you. They are looking out for you. They have your best interests at heart, and they really want to see you succeed. And so I think if you don't have it in your current company, maybe the resources aren't there, reach out to people in your territory. And, a lot of us are healthcare professionals. Reach out to your own personal network, your pharmacy societies, your NP societies, your PA societies. Reach out, see who else is in your area, and try to find someone that way. I do think it's really important to buddy up in the beginning. Otherwise, it does feel like you're a little bit on an island. It can be a little isolating, and you can get stuck mentally, I think, in your head on a lot of it. I do also think people sometimes when they start a new job, I've heard people say, like, I'm just going to keep my head down and work hard. And I don't know if that, personally for me, I don't know if that's the best tactic when you're first starting. I do think you need to speak up. I think you need to make those connections and relationships. And so I don't know if that's a good tactic for this field, particularly, like keeping your head down working. I don't know if that's going to work in being an MSL when you first start, because you need to build relationships. And
you're saying be
get yourself
collaborative
out there. Absolutely, be collaborative. That I think is super duper key. It might work in some fields just to put your head down, work really hard. Yeah. I'm not sure for industry if that's the way, to be honest.
It's great advice. No, it's great advice. I mean, you're in it, and that's why I wanted you, to come back on to talk about what is working and what are the challenges and how do you navigate through those? So I think that's awesome advice.
Oh, thanks.
So now, as we're talking about it, you started your role during a pandemic, right?
Yes.
So I'm
Yes.
sure that added additional challenges. So we go back to the KOL engagement discussion, has
Yes.
COVID made it
Yes.
easier, harder? Like, what difficulties are you facing? Because I'm sure it's the same with whether you're a new MSL or experienced MSL. I'm curious to hear what you're facing.
Yeah, I think definitely starting during COVID added some additional challenges. I think trying to create a relationship virtually is challenging, and I didn't think it was going to be as challenging as it was. And I realized I really like being in person. Like
Yeah,
I'm a hugger. I'm like, hey, how's that? So
yeah, me too.
I like being in person, right? Yeah, and so I think those of us who like being in person, it ended up being more challenging than I thought it'd be. When you're in person, there's more warmth. There's body language you can read much more easily. There's more opportunity to create small talk in between. Like if you're in a clinic, you can talk to the office people, the office manager and staff. You can talk to other providers on the way. It's easier to have more opportunities. So I think that was a little bit of a challenge. In the virtual environment too, which I think it's funny, you have to learn virtual body language. So like you're in clinic in person, it's a lot easier to see if your provider is short on time. They look, rushed coming in. They might have to go. A nurse comes to the door of the office, kind of like signals to them, like, "Hey, your next patient's kind of here." They're like, "Oh, okay, great." And you go, "Hey, doc, do you need to go? I can come back again next month. I'm so happy that we got to talk this time, but let me know what questions you have, and we'll rediscuss more next time." And to wrap it up quickly. But when you're on virtual, you can't see anything else. So there's these like micro clues you have to tune into where you have your provider, they're like staring at your slides and they might do like a quick eye dart like this, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And you
yeah.
have to know that they're looking at a nurse at the door of the office,
Right.
or that you get the forehead because they're staring at your slides, and you get and so now they're getting text on their phone and they need to go to the
Right.
hospital. So these like weird, like little, you're not getting the full face, you're getting like a forehead and you're trying to read the clues. So you
Yeah.
have to be like, oh, do you need to go get that? Or, oh, do you want to answer that? Assuming like, is that your phone that you're looking down at now? And you have to try to read these like virtual
Yeah.
clues, which
Yeah.
I think is like a new skill. So,
The nonverbal side. For those of you listening right now,
yeah.
you're going to have to watch this on YouTube because Julie's making all these faces and there's a whole nother thing going on right now. So yeah, you might want to check it out.
Sorry. You might have to watch this on YouTube if
Yeah.
you're curious on what virtual engagements are
Yeah.
like live.
Yeah. No,
But
that was good.
it's a little different. It's a little different.
Yeah.
So I think those were some challenges I wasn't, aware of. I think with COVID in general, it was a really tough time. I was field ready right at the end of December, early January, which
Yeah.
for us in the US was peak COVID times. And so being very conscious of the fact that our healthcare system was getting slammed, providers were overwhelmed, and being very sensitive to their time and need. And there was not a lot of access at the time because people were closed to pharma because they had to focus on their patients. They had to focus on, tackling COVID. And I think at the same time, like as a provider, if you had 10 minutes to spare at the end of the day, you might just want to go home and get some rest.
Yeah.
Because
Right.
these providers have been fighting this pandemic for last year.
Yep.
This is the third and hugest wave. And and from the industry perspective, I think as a humanistic point of view, we don't want to talk to the provider when they're burnt out and
Yeah.
they really need 10 minutes to decompress, go home to their family, have a quiet meal, and mentally recharge. So I think when we did engage, it was trying to make sure that you really provided value. It was a topic they wanted to talk about. I was fortunate in that my topic in cardiology, there was, some link to COVID, so there was some interest, but just being really, really conscious of time,
Yep.
knowing that they might only have 5 or 10 minutes, and making sure it's really, really valuable,
Yep.
and not being offended if they need to go or reschedule or cut it short because they have other things.
Well, and
And so,
it's great advice. And that's where, we talk about emotional intelligence all the time on
Mm-hmm.
this podcast. And
Mm-hmm.
that's where that comes
Yeah.
in, where you really have to read the other person and realize
Yeah.
that, yeah, we might have an agenda going in, but you really
Mm-hmm.
have to
Mm-hmm.
follow their guidance, their lead, their cues,
Yeah.
because that's
Yes.
ultimately what's going to be most important. And that's what's going to build that relationship when they see that, wow, you know what, Julie always really appreciates my time and she always adds value,
Yeah.
and she's not going to make me uncomfortable or push the envelope or take up too much of my
Right.
time. So I think it's great advice.
Yeah, and I think it's true. I think you come into your new MSL role and you're like, yes, I've got emotional intelligence. I know how to listen. It really stretches that part of your soft skills and to a very deep sense, because you're listening, but you do come in with agendas. So there's almost like two conversations happening in your head
Right.
now. You're trying to listen, and you come with an agenda, and sometimes you want to push. But I've learned, like, more and more, I need to just listen. And if I need to come back to finish up my discussion, that's okay. But I need to listen and hear their concerns, their questions, what is important to them, because that's where you're gonna provide that value. So I think that is something I'm still learning, and like learning to be an MSL, something I'm gonna have to keep learning. But really, really listening
Yeah.
is harder than it
Huge.
seems.
Yeah, because we want
It's
to
huge.
talk. We want to say what we're ready to say next, but it takes
Yes, yeah.
discipline and patience to stop and listen. And that's where you get guidance on what you should be saying next. So that's
Yeah.
why it's so important. What about, have you learned about any like tools or resources since you started that might be good to pass along to others that have been helpful for you?
Yeah, I think that might vary depending on people's therapeutic areas, but just in general, for a lot of MSLs, I think there's a lot of databases out there. Definitive Health is one of the databases, and certain companies might have access to certain databases or membership to databases. And this helps when you're first trying to start your KOL mapping and your territory search. It helps to find out who's linked to who might be a good person to put on your list that you might want to reach out to. For me specifically, because I was in cardiology, I think it's really important to stay clinically relevant. So I love to jump on to ACC, which is like American College of Cardiology, TCT, MD, which are cardiology websites, and signing up for like their links and their highlights and weekly highlights. But they also have really great summaries and videos and podcasts on there. And as much as you want to read everything, you can't. You only have so many hours in the day. You need a mental break at the end of the day, but you also want to stay relevant. And so you might hear a topic and you want to hear about it because it's not directly affecting your data, but it's related. And so it's good to be in the know so you can keep the conversation up. So I think finding those therapeutic communities is really, really critical. So for cardiology, it was like, ACC was huge. AC Forum was another one. But then there's other general ones like HCP Live, and just trying to get news information that providers are reading, because you want to see the same headlines that they're getting. What is popping up on their side, and how is it being phrased? Because sometimes people like to make the news exciting. So they'll, the results were neutral, but they'll say, oh, this molecule failed failed in this study. And you're like, oh, it was a neutral study though, which is sometimes fine. But it'll be interesting how people want to twist it to grab you to read the article.
Yeah.
And then when you read the article, it's a little different. So it's interesting to hear those headlines and to be aware of them. Yeah.
No, it's great advice. You're establishing yourself as the expert, as the go-to person.
Yeah.
So in order for you to be relevant, you have to be in the know and know what's relevant.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. And I think if you're stepping into a therapeutic area that you're not as strong in, or maybe it's been a few years, one thing that I haven't started getting into, but I plan to have a couple on my list to listen to, is podcasts. There's a lot of physicians and specialists starting to do podcasts in their areas of specialty, neurology, nephrology, cardiology, and listening to those podcasts to hear the way they're speaking, the way they're discussing certain trials, what's pertinent and on their horizon. I think that's going to be a really great resource just moving forward as I try to get deeper into my field.
Awesome. All right. So we covered a lot, but what would you say as there are people that are new to the role and they're preparing for like the 30, 60, 90 day, like their
Yeah.
first 3, maybe even 6 months into the role? What
Yeah.
advice would you have for those folks?
So I think, gosh, okay, in the first 30 days, it's a lot. Get your lay of the land, absorb as much as you can, because it's not just the clinical part, it's learning the pharma jargon. And it's so funny because I come from Kaiser, and Kaiser loves acronyms. Like, we're acronyms all day long,
Yeah.
right? Industry and pharma also loves
Yeah.
acronyms. They love acronyms. They do. And so learning the language, learning what people are talking about, understanding your company culture, the politics, understanding the team dynamic, I think, and putting yourself out there to be part of it is really important in the first 30 days, and trying to be connected, getting to know your teammates, your commercial partners. So that might be a lot to do in the first 30 days, but that's why it's intense, the first 30 days. 60 days in, or, a month or two in, you're really starting to work on your territory plan. And I think, again, that initial connection you're trying to make with everyone, that's where you want to talk with your internal partners, your commercial partners, other MSLs on your team, in your area. And the reason you want to do this is because it really helps you to get some background on your territory.
Yeah.
And it can be small things, like the stories about other providers, about a location. Oh, make sure you park here.
Yeah.
Call this clinic on a Tuesday afternoon because they'll pick up. And if you try other days, they're just slammed. They're never going to pick up. After 2 p.m., this is the time. Ask for this person. Ask for Tom. They're going to help you out. Whatever it is, these little tips that you're going to get from other people is really going to be helpful. These clues, these like breadcrumbs, will lead you to the bigger picture. So I think doing that background research, information gathering, so that you're not coming in blind, is really, really helpful. And a lot of times people won't be starting with a brand new team. You'll have other people on your team, and so picking their brain is going to be helpful. So
Awesome. All right.
But
I think that
I want to say that.
go ahead.
Go
For
ahead.
it.
Okay, I would say for the last leg, I think when you're 3 months in, you're 90 days out, you're a little bit further, at 3 to 6 months mark. I think you need to take a moment to re-strategize, because when you're first coming in, you may think but you don't know till you get out there.
Yeah.
And so taking that moment to really strategize and plan is going to be important. Sometimes it's easiest to try to go for the lowest hanging fruit because you're hungry, you want to get out there, you want to prove yourself. You're like, yes, I'm getting out there, I'm getting out there. But at a moment, you need to pull back and make sure you're not being too spread out, too random. You want to be really, really strategic in how you're approaching your territory, how you're approaching your providers. And so maybe taking that moment to take a step back and reflect, like, okay, I did this for the first 30 days. Is it working? How am I going to make waves in my area? Because it's not just that you want to reach out to providers, you also want to make an impact. So how are you going to make that impact?
Yeah.
And trying to be strategic. So I think planning strategically and doing, I think that's something we'd all have to do every couple months. Like I have to take a step back and look at my full plan and say, strategically, is this making sense? Am I pushing in a certain direction? And is all this synergistically going to come to fruition? And focusing that energy in certain ways. So if you don't, you can just be really random and then start to run out of gas.
Yeah.
So, well, now what? So being strategic and taking that moment to reanalyze is, I think, really important. A couple months.
It's great. I mean, that's huge, because if you look at, managing up and making sure that you're keeping, the powers that be happy and keeping your goals in mind, if you don't take a step back and be strategic and see the value that you're adding, how it's being added, how you're impacting your territory, it's going to be hard to keep on top of it to make sure you're on the right track.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Julie, as always, you do not disappoint. I do appreciate it. And I know everybody else that's listening appreciates your tremendous advice. So before we finish, let's once again invite everybody to join us next Tuesday for MSL Talk Live on Clubhouse at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time. So would you like to share the first topic?
Yeah, so our first topic is going to be successfully landing your first MSL job. We're going to share some insider tips and stories on how people landed their first role. And we're going to have a really cool panel guest. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun. So join us live. It's going to be amazing. We hope you guys will really like it.
Can't wait. I'm excited. We're going to hear from some great folks that have some really great stories about what worked for them. So it's going to be a great conversation. Join us. As always, we appreciate you guys listening, and we're really grateful. And Julie, thanks again. You're the best. Can't wait till next week.
Thanks so much, Tom.
Thank you so much for listening to the show. If you've enjoyed it, please subscribe so that you don't miss episodes in the future. And feel free to leave a rating or a review or a comment. Thanks again, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.